You,
Gentlemen,
what's up, brother?
What's happening?
my humble apologies for my tardiness, especially because I got
We've been
caught up
chilling.
feeding my newest addiction. Huge shout out to our sponsor, Playable Games. They are inspired by gamers and funded by their community. They have a epic game on the Epic Games Store, a third-person shooter called Nexus. Hop on in there and check that out. They're also currently selling nodes, so if you're interested, check that out at their website, Playable.Games. That is a 3 instead of a B on Playable. Now strap in for the rest of this episode of Interlink. This is going to be One Piece trading cards.
It's fucking awesome, dude.
And I just
Oh
missed time
man,
coming back from the shop. But
that's incredible. I gotta show those to Miles, man. I think he really likes One Piece.
Let's
bro,
go.
I am convinced that One Piece is our generation's Lord of the Rings. Like, and I say that you guys know about how I feel about the Lord of the
I
Rings.
know. I need to watch. All right,
Wow.
I need to watch it. Miles loves it, and I was like, we watched Cyberpunk, and I was like, dude, that was amazing. And he's like, you got to watch One
Oh,
Piece. I'm like, all right, I'll do it.
Cyberpunk, so good.
So good.
So I had like avoided getting any of the trading cards because I was still too early in the manga. I am now 4 books away from being current.
Nice.
So I
Wow.
started when I went to Japan in November, and now I've read current is 109. I'm on 106. So in
Oh
this year,
shit.
I've read 106 of these, which each contain 10 of the comics.
Oh
So
wow.
what are
That is
we?
incredible.
So 1,000? Over
I
1,000?
admire I admire your dedication, sir.
Oh,
Yeah, that's
bro.
incredible, man.
It's so good. And like the ability for them, like, there are no small characters in One Piece. They'll introduce a throwaway character in like fucking book 5, and then in book 85, you realize that is not just some throwaway character. That is an integral part of the plot that Oda weaved into the story 20 fucking years ago. So he
That
had
is
like all
awesome.
Wow.
these breadcrumbs of stuff where, I mean, it was literally 20 years to actually be like, oh shit, like that's an integral part of the plot.
Wow. Can we can we on part of this episode debate? I would like to debate anime a little bit because
Yes.
I think anime has had such an outsized impact on the people who are whatever our collective ages and younger, an outsized influence on what we think and how we view the world.
Also, should we just include this? LeBoomington, you're gonna have to bear with us. There's no intro today. When I hopped
Yeah.
on, the podcast
We
started.
we've been chatting for like 10 minutes, so it's perfect.
We cannot rob them from this anime alpha we have dropped upon our audience. So welcome to Interlinked, motherfuckers. You're halfway in. Let me plug my laptop in so it doesn't die here.
Can
Oh,
you
this
still
is
hear
amazing.
us whilst plugging in the
I
machine?
can. I got my headphones in.
Okay, good. So, okay, but hear me out. There are definitely signs of people being influenced by anime. I would say it's probably had a tremendous impact. And if we look back at who made a lot of these, then I think you could make a pretty good argument to say that Japan has probably had a huge impact on a lot of us. And like, I bet you there are now other creators of anime that are coming onto the scene. And what is that going to mean for the next generations? And how has that impacted, like, because I think one of America's biggest exports has been culture, no
For
doubt.
sure.
And how do you guys think that's played into the world we live today? Like what sort of an impact has it? Or is that just totally overblown and not even worth digging into?
No, I think that's 100% accurate. I mean, obviously, we had a massive influence in Japan after World War II, essentially because of the bombings, the fire bombings, the nuclear bombs, all of the war. Like Japan got essentially like control alt deleted a huge chunks of it and then was completely rebuilt in partnership with the United States. And so obviously we exported a ton of our infrastructure, culture, but now I totally agree. It's come, really reverberating back. I mean, you think about the influence of Pokemon, Dragon Ball, and Dragon Ball Z on me personally. PlayStation, like all of the IP that's come out of that, like the Game Boy. I mean, you could argue this entire gaming wave leading to where we are right now in Web3 gaming was completely influenced by Japan.
It's a I think there's a strong chance, or at least there's strong evidence of that for sure. I guess my question is, what what values have been instilled because of that? Because you could say, okay, Pokemon was you learned about the powers of working towards something. You learned about the powers of strategic thinking. You learned about the powers of delayed gratification and thinking, okay, well, if I if I train this Pikachu for X number of battles, or if I start with my weakest and I swap it out to my strongest so that we could XP share, so like there's some strategic thinking there. But also, are we thinking, all right, it's totally okay to go and capture things that are weaker than us and force them to do our bidding? You know what I mean? Like, I think there's pros and cons there. Like, what are the merits of some of these values? What are the values in the first place?
No, I think that's a really interesting point. Certainly, during World War II, Japan had a very big gotta catch 'em all in Southeast Asia, including many of the islands in the Pacific. So that is a comparison I've never really thought of before. But certainly, like, I mean, Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z had like such a big influence on me of like, if you work really hard, you can rise to this level and like sort of like transcend your previous barriers through a combination of hard work and yelling.
I, look, I think there's also sort of a huge part of, post World War II, especially auto manufacturing and electronics. So think about number one, Japan almost wiped out the entire mechanical watch industry, right? In the 70s when the quartz crisis came out. Think about Toyota, Nissan, like lean manufacturing, like Kaizen, right? Continuous improvement, those little like 1% changes that you make sort of across the entire board. It's like all of those make a huge difference. Um, Scheduling and like Kanban boards. Like think about all the different things that were put in like after that and what the powerhouse they were, like sort of starting in the 50s, but really like 70s and 80s. And that was built into the culture of like, in the 80s, all the movies, they were all wearing suits. They came in and they were like said three words and then like had like, like, oh man, what is this guy? Like, they always had the American guy, like, hey, what's happening? And then the Japanese guy was all dressed up and said something in Japanese, typically like berating him. This was like right in the middle of all the 80s. And then boom, they pay for everything and buy it all. I mean, that was like the sort of the stereotype of it. But I mean, all that came from like Toyota, Nissan, and the, absolute powerhouse that they became. And remember, started kicking our ass in automobiles when we were like the king. We were just like sitting back and Japan like destroyed us.
And a lot of other advanced manufacturing and electronics. And I'm pretty sure it was Japan that they had different manufacturers that were kind of the main suppliers of Nike. I'm pretty sure that's in the early days that was like the competitive advantage was the Nike guy went over and was like, "Hey, these are great shoes. I want to bring them over here." But it's interesting how they kind of trailed off and like, yes, they're still a major economic force in the world, of course, but I think if you go back and look in the 90s, there was this fear of Japan's gonna own everything,
For
and
sure.
there was definitely that era of the economy and the world.
And the Walkman, I mean, if you think about the like Sony Walkman, the first like to my knowledge, like one of the first like portable music devices, leading then to, I mean, you can kind of directly put a line between like the Walkman and then the first iPods, sort of iterating on that like new generation, which obviously led to like the iPhone, like obviously video games, like they were on like sort of like the bleeding edge, like the car manufacturing, to your point. Like one of my favorite sayings that I'm going to steal from a podcast is German cars, which are some of the best in the world, assume that you're going to do everything right as far as maintenance, when Japanese cars assume you're going to do everything wrong. So I have a 2014 Toyota Tacoma for that exact reason. I've got two cars. I've got a 1999 German M3, which has already spent more time in the shop in the 1 year that or the 6 weeks I've owned it than the entire Toyota Tacoma has in the last, you know, 2 or 3 years. Um, and it's like the perfect combination of like sort of like reliability, but the M3 is fun when it's working, but the Tacoma, I know come hell or high water, I'm gonna stick the key in that thing and it's gonna get me where I need to go.
Well, also I think it's interesting to then see how the I'll say the rise and decline ish of Japan coincided with then the rise and continued rise of China. So there was almost this interesting checking function or balancing function between these geographic neighbors where now there's not really as much of a checking function, and it's probably a little bit more scary to be in Japan and just looking at this enormous continent of manufacturing dominance, and then looking back and you're like, uh-oh, we really don't have an answer to most of that, and we're pretty reliant on it for most things. So it's kind of interesting to see how those have the fall and decline.
And an interesting parallel between our two nations I hadn't thought of before is like we both started very isolationist. Like obviously Japan started like completely isolationist and then we're sort of forced open between sort of like I think the Portuguese and the Europeans and then eventually the Americans opening them up to the world. But the US did that too. Up until World War I, we were very isolationist, didn't want to get involved. And then, World War One really opened that up for the United States. And then after World War II for Japan, I mean, they were open between, the 1850s and World War II, but now being completely incorporated into the modern world. And then I think there's also some big lessons we can take to Japan on, okay, what happens if you don't navigate a debt crisis like properly? Like they had some of the biggest bubbles that have ever formed in the modern era between real estate and their stock market. I think at some point, like single buildings in Tokyo were worth more than like all of Los Angeles. That might be a bit hyperbolic, but it's in
Wow.
the right ballpark. Um, and really, we're just seeing Japan coming out of the deflationary debt crisis that they were in, 25 years later.
Yeah, they had multi-generational loans that you would take, like grandparents, parents, and children would go and get a loan because it was 99 years, because it's not like one generation is going to be able to afford it. So, and then, they also have the crisis with the birth rate. And, I think that has a lot to do with it. And I think we sort of, maybe we don't underestimate, but lots of people might, of just how much culture that Japan has pushed out. I mean, if you think of, when you want to get like something cool, like a sword, or, you're out just like your kids are into it, lots of those things are Japanese. And my son and my wife is like in love with Japanese culture. And it is, like you were talking about the Walkman. I mean, I don't remember one, maybe the first iPhone, maybe, but I think the Walkman was bigger because I lived through that. And it was like, when the yellow one came out that you could take near the pool and it wouldn't get wet. it was huge. It was like if you didn't have one, they're like, "What is wrong with you?" It was such a moment in history that I don't really maybe Jordan fours something like it's that kind of level of a status and icon. And I mean, Japan has had such a large influence, and they've certainly had an impact on culture. I would say almost more than anyone. I mean, in relation to say their size of their nation, probably the most, I would imagine.
Yeah, they kick way outside of their weight class. And if anyone's interested in this sort of like electronic history of Japan, like could not recommend more the district of Tokyo called Akibata. And it's just full of electronics where you'll go into these. One of the big differences I noticed between the United States and Japan is like usually we have just the first couple floors for retail and then the rest is residential. And in Japan, it can be retail all the way up in certain sections. So you'll have 7, 8-story buildings where every floor is a different store, and then like even parts of the floor are segregated. So like, you'll have these like little alleys you'll go through, and this alley will be all Walkman, all pieces for Walkmans. Next one will be like Nokia cameras, digital film, lenses, like, and you can go in and get like hardware from the early 1990s repaired by people that have been doing it since the early 1990s.
Wow.
So this brings up a really interesting point. I've kind of gone down a rabbit hole of reading about China, and I'm obsessed with it. I can't stop myself. I don't want to be fair, but it's just been so much fun. One of the best books I've read so far is called Apple in China. And it just talks about that story. And one of the things that was really hit home there, and I'll tie this back into Japan in just a second, but one of the things that was really interesting was in the earlier parts of that relationship between Apple and China, you saw Apple sending over engineers to China all the time. And they would send people over. And what happened was there were basically these clusters of engineers and engineering, but more importantly, engineering communities who would over time develop precious process knowledge. And so it was this knowledge that allowed them to scale up manufacturing and be able to achieve excellence at scale and just understand how these different parts worked. Nowadays, by the way, we have to bring people from China to the US to do a lot of manufacturing. It's a little sad, but besides the point, one of the things they talked about in the book was how important this process knowledge was and the difference in attitude of the West versus the East, where in the West, a lot of times we think, oh, well, we can just build a robot to deal with this issue for us, or we can just rely on technology to deal with this issue for us. But if we don't have that knowledge of the process and we don't have generations of people who have been compounding that knowledge over time, you actually can't solve it with technology because you don't know how. And so you forget as a society how to do things if you don't sharpen that skill set over time. And so to tie that back into Japan, one of the um, anecdotes within that book was the idea of there's this one place in Japan, I can't recall what it is at the moment, but they have this spiritual structure and it's a wooden structure. And so the idea is that every 100 years or so, or however many years, they've got to replace the entire structure because it's made out of wood. And so things will happen to it, so on and so forth. But because they continue to preserve their process knowledge and compound this knowledge of how these things are done generation after generation, even though the particular components of the structure are being replaced and um, rebuilt, replaced, upgraded, etc., time and time again, it's that knowledge that stays and that grows. And that particular structure has been there since I want to say 700 BC or 700 BC or AD, a long time, many, many thousands of years. And the difference between that and looking at a lot of the infrastructure here in the US, for example, where we try to build something that's permanent, but then it gets old and decays and we've forgotten how to do that. And we've forgotten how to build. And we've forgotten how to rejuvenate the infrastructure. And so we try to like one and done it. And then we're like, oh, we don't have to remember that, instead of, oh, let's compound our knowledge and preserve that critical intel of how do we do this. And I just thought that was incredibly fascinating and probably very important to what's actually going on in the world today, of how we've kind of forgotten how to build and just the approach to those things.
For sure. I mean, the fostering of that knowledge, passing it down to like across generations, like it's a hard problem. And now I think maybe like our current generation is so used to everything being digitally backed up that we take that for like extra granted. We always just assume like, oh, my pictures are in the cloud, that like files in the cloud, like everything is sort of like backed up where, without the knowledge of like what to do with that, it's hard to actually maintain those structures.
That I bet that has a lot to do with how cohesive our culture is. So you can go to California and have a completely different culture than New York, than Boston, than New Orleans. They are vastly different. There's slight cohesiveness, but you could look at it and say, "Wow, there's nothing." It makes a little bit of sense, but not really. Whereas, say China or Japan have a much more cohesive culture across the entire country. Now, obviously, there'll be differences, but the fact that they're instilling that sort of knowledge, I think that is one of the reasons why it is just their brand. Our brand is many brands, and it's, that may be good or bad, I don't know, but their brand is certainly a brand, and it keeps it sort of front of mind. Where it's like Japan, you have an idea, but it's like US, you're like, some people have vastly different ideas of it than others, even those that live here. And I think that's sort of an interesting point. I don't know if you made me think about that. I don't know if I've ever thought about that before.
Plus, one thing I've been chewing on, which is sort of tangentially related to this, is like, I think there's a divergence about the physical and digital world in the aspect that, like, we're heading into or are already in this very, like, multipolar period of time where we've been, in a unipolar or bipolar for, since World War II. And this multipolar is actually causing more and more of an erosion of globalization and like barriers to come up, either like physical or like, if you ever wanted to go and visit Russia, like now there's a big war going on. And that used to be for the last, since the wall came down, that was a very easy thing to do. Oh, I mean, we're going to go and do a trip to Moscow or something like that. So that's just one example. But like even like the relations between the US and China or, other parts of the world. But at the same time, where the physical world is actually becoming more divided, like the digital world has never been more interconnected, where, even things like Squid Games coming out of Korea and becoming like a huge national thing, or, our microcosm of the cryptocurrency community, where every single day you're interacting with people and building businesses with people that have, complete geographic dispersion. I mean, I still raise eyebrows every time I tell people they're like, "Oh, where's your office?" I'm like, none of the companies I work for have an office. There is no super office. There is no Neo Tokyo office. Like they exist on the internet, which is just such a cool new trend. And I think it's just kind of interesting that there's that physical and digital divergence going on.
So I think this brings up a really good point. There's also the difference between the, I'll call it production economy, and the financial or the financialized economy, where there's real production power of, can I create a tank? Can I create a chip or a computer? Can I create a fridge? Whatever. The like production power, but then the financialized economy, which is what's the market cap of this asset or what's the value of this asset. Those are totally different things. You could have an asset that financially is worth nothing, but can produce a ton of things or low and can produce a ton of things. I think what's very interesting is, at least according to what I've been reading, China is more of an engineering state where they've been very focused on that quote unquote real economy or what they'd have described as hard power of like think of everything engineering. Can we build um, heavy industry, right? And the U.S. has been very much focused, and the West has been very much focused on service-based like financial services, different financing thing. And we've gone very heavy into, I think, very heavy to software in a way that's some might be more described as soft power. And we can debate, hard power versus soft power. Um, but that's just very interesting to me how there does seem like there's a difference and there does seem like there is ground truth in both of those approaches, but it kind of seems like we're kind of coming to this head where the engineering state versus what I might describe as like more of a not an intellectual state, but more of like a legal, almost a legal state where I would say most of our governance is being managed or administered by people who have gone to law school. And most of China's governance has come from people who are literal engineers. And so I think there are these pros and cons there. It's showing in some of the results that we're getting. And I think it's quite interesting to think about that and just think about what are the pros and cons of each one, and are we sleepwalking into a down a path where we're going to be unhappy if we don't maybe take a little bit from what they're doing right and bring that into our system.
No, I think definitely like if we don't learn from these examples or, develop that sort of manufacturing power, like we're going to be at a severe disadvantage. And I tend to
Well,
think that'll affect, or sorry, Ben.
uh, and even it may not even just be manufacturing power. Like maybe we should think about things more from an engineering perspective. Maybe we shouldn't, because sometimes you get things like the one child policy and you get really 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 good at sprinting in the complete wrong direction. I mean, I'm pretty sure if you look at the projections that they're going to go from a 1.4-ish billion person population down to like a 700 million person population within the next couple of decades. Like that is just radically anti-human and is going to be counterproductive to their aims of becoming the global leader. Like you need more. I think you probably need more people all pushing in the same direction and compounding together to be more powerful. I think you could probably say that, some caveats, but yeah. So I don't even know if it's just manufacturing. I think it's just the mindset of like we're gonna engineer things versus we're gonna debate things, and
Mhm.
I just think that's interesting. But anyway, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I don't even know where I was going to go from there. Sometimes I just start revving before I even have a destination. That's why I was like, okay, neutral.
Yeah,
Um,
that's good. I like that. And I think businesses can kind of learn from that as well. Because you can get overly sort of logistical or, SOP based rather than like, let's look at the destination and let's maybe think of other alternatives rather than just X, Y, and Z, get new software, get more people, and put more heads to it. But hey, there's probably something else. And I think that you've seen sort of what happens in our society here, and especially our laws, like how just it's just like an extra 10%. It's like a budget, right? It's like, oh, this law was this long. Let's make it a little bit longer. I mean, and it's all written by lawyers, and they're just like, oh, this is what we did last time. Let's do that and add a few more things to clarify it because X, Y, and Z came out this case. And it makes it sort of unwieldy. And the more we're going, the more unwieldy it is. When you can just like look at the code of Federal Register and all the different rules and regulations that are in there, and just how obese they are. And, a really good example would be the Louisiana Constitution, which, you would think of a constitution as like this really short document. Ours is insanely long and it has things in there for individual parishes. And at that point, the only way to fix the problems where, we always have problems here with budgets and what to do, but there's so many constitutionally protected parts of our government because the lawyers have come in and said, oh, let's do that, lobbyists and all that, that there's only a few things you can cut budgets from. So the only way to do that is to just slash it and rewrite the Constitution from scratch and do more of an outline like the US Constitution. And I think if we have that across the board, then we would be better off. And I love the idea of taking sort of an engineering mindset and sort of, I think what we need to do is start with, okay, what are the assumptions that we're working with here? Like one, two, three, whatever they are. And then let's build something that fits where we need to go. And I don't know well, that's probably never been a discussion here in the US of like, what's our end game? What do we want to become? Here's maybe a chance where we can stop. It's always a chance, but like, where do we want to go? What do we want to be? And maybe certain sections of the country may want to be something and not that. And, we have the options are so big. I mean, that would be a fantastic sort of national debates. Like, all right, well, this is going to be agriculture and this is how we're going to do it. And, this is how we're going to make it sustainable. And we could do that across the board. And it's like, you even have certain places like, say, Chicago fighting with, New York about being financial. Let's team up and like come up with, a game plan. And then like you're saving resources, whereas like maybe all this mind power and energy is being used in both places for the same outcome. Like put them together, it's like a lot easier. But we don't do that here. We're so like, separated and segregated that it's hard to put that force together. And I think that would make a big difference. And I think engineering is a great way to do that. That's a great idea.
A really interesting image that I think you were painting was the idea of a legal system being obese and these existing regulations acting as the calcification of the arteries and the veins and different, like you need blood to be able to flow through the circulatory system, but if you have all these blockers it's hard to flow. I think the other side is like, all right, but yeah, there was a reason for that at some point. Maybe they got it wrong, but I'm sure there was a reason for that. And if you didn't have it, like if you had no regulation, would that be better than the amount of regulation we have now? I don't know. I
I
actually
think
don't
that
know.
comes down to the original question of we used to be the United States plural, and now we're the United States singular, where we had sort of a web of interconnected countries that all were going and doing their own thing. And now we have something entirely different where the US is sort of taking over and bloating and constricting that, where the blood flow used to be from state to state and the states could do their own thing. Now they're more of like, maybe some local questions, but the overall question of where each individual state's going to go is sort of decided by the federal government. I think that's sort of the root of that issue for us.
Oh, interesting. How do you reverse that? Or
Um,
do you reverse that?
I mean, at this point, it would be hard, but you have to start looking at the 10th Amendment, which anything not in the Constitution reverts back to the states. And then the states themselves have to start taking back, the power from the federal government. Like education. Do we need a Department of Education? I know that's like a huge topic, but like maybe the federal government resources should be put somewhere else and you let 50 states kind of run their own education system. Do we need a federal authority for that? I'm sure the people in all 50 states could find someone somewhat competent to say, here's some things these kids need to learn. Here's the curriculum. If you don't like it, move to Wyoming because their curriculum is something entirely different. And I think that
That
would make a big difference.
that is such a good point of if you let 50 entities compete, at some point the meritocracy should solve the issue. Like let the free market decide. Whoever does the best on a state level is going to have the it's the case study to show the other states how they suck and encourage everybody to do better. That seems like that's a much more free market dynamic instead of just saying, all right, everybody, you have to do it this way. What's interesting too is, again, according to the book, this other book is called Breakneck. Super good, super good about U.S. China. How that author described the Chinese governance structure is that at the top they actually just set mandates of this is what we want to happen, but then each like province or territory or region, whatever you want to call it, they have their own local government systems, and they're allowed to basically figure out their own way of accomplishing the goal set up. So it's like the brain of think of this is where we want to go, but then the different interconnected parts of the body saying, okay, this is how we're going to get there, and we're each independently thinking about it. Maybe that's a bad analogy, but then they use a meritocracy and they actually use a lot of positive reinforcement in the form of if a particular leader of a particular province does well accomplishing the aims set by the top, they get promoted in the state system. So you then have a ton of local entities all acting with a singular purpose, and they are very incentivized to do so. The governors of those provinces are very incentivized to do that because then they'll get rewarded. They'll get personally rewarded. It's a very interesting setup of meritocracy. And yes, it's state planning, but it's not exactly how we might have initially thought. It's kind of interesting. What do you guys think about that? Because it seems like that was kind of some of the most beautiful parts of what made us the United States was that each state could kind of define its own path and chart its own course, and then we each other state could learn from the ones that are doing the best, and then it's just this beautiful free marketplace where we can all learn from each other in a grand marketplace of ideas where the best ones can rise to the top.
Yeah, I think the fact that we've been doing it so centralized, like in some levels, you just got to look at like how does the dog hunt? And right now, at least centralized education, we're doing the worst we've ever done. Eighth grade and I think senior math and science scores just hit all-time lows. So like maybe a centralized model works, but our centralized model isn't. So like, do we revert to, and maybe it's an oscillation where you allow the free market to cook for a while and then you standardize and then that standard ends up like degrading and you have to go back to like a free market state-based approach. And I think like part of like the contributing factor is like, yes, you can just move to another state. And for me, like that seems so easy because that's what I've done my entire adult life is live in North Carolina, Texas, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Colorado. But from a national trend standpoint, most people are living and dying right where they were born, like no time ever before, which is sort of another juxtaposition between digitally, we're never more interconnected but physically, most people are just staying in the exact same place. And I think they're now viewing that as some sort of human right where you get like, real estate appreciation ruffling so many feathers. Oh, these people who lived here no longer can afford to live here. Like, I have such, and maybe this is a fault, little empathy for those people because the human condition is if the fucking buffalo move, you either starve to death or you follow the buffalo. So this like new trend where people have like a human right to just stay where they've always been, like we're a fucking tree and we don't have the ability just to like move, like that is not the American way, or it used to never be. That used to be the European way. But now we're sort of like adopting that. And I think we're now suffering more and more problems that used to be more traditionally European than they were American.
So I was just in Portugal. Got to see Felix, got to see LeBoomington. Shout out to the homies. Actually, got to see a ton of people from NT. Shout out to everybody there. And one of the things, the resounding things that I heard when I was talking to locals was my family has been here for generations, or this has been passed down from generation to generation of the family. It's exactly what you just said. So just as like a boots on the ground anecdote, 100% evidence of supporting that sentiment. 100%.
And we are the descendants of people who moved. Obviously, the French, went and colonized Louisiana, the Northeasterners. Like my ancestors came, a bunch of them from like Italy during like World War II. But now we've become very, very stagnant. And I think we're seeing, different problems because of that.
I wonder when in history has been the closest parallel to today for the US.
Hmm.
That's a fascinating question.
Like economically, which is a little bit of a different plane than we're discussing right now, but that's the only one where I really see like clear parallels. It seems like we're in a roaring 20s where wealth disparity is starting to like really peak. We're at levels that we haven't seen, since the 20s. We're having like this sort of new oil barons or like tycoons like forming where we're seeing the Trump family. It's very, prolific real estate family now getting super involved, obviously, in politics as he's now the president, but like George Soros, Elon Musk, like, Bill Gates, all of these like tycoons who are now on such levels that are, transcending what the average American can even understand. I mean, the average American makes 50K a year. And these guys are making, I think, I don't know, Elon Musk's most recent like Tesla like appreciation is in the billions. Like it's insane levels of like wealth disparity and like winners and losers. Like we're just starting to see this market broaden out a bit. But like if you weren't in the Magnificent Seven for like the last handful of years, like you weren't really getting any of the gains. They're all super concentrated.
Yeah, and we've got, tech taking over oil and becoming, like I think about Meta, right? I mean, Meta has, I believe, put an offer in for like nine figures for somebody, right? For one of their AIs. It's like that's a ceiling that I don't think I didn't see coming, like ready to be broken. I was like, wow. So, but to me, it shows, the people that are in the know understand how valuable that software and how valuable that person who understands that is, because that return is probably going to be, I don't know, 10 to 15 times that. So we're talking now, all right, so now we're talking AI is going to be a trillion plus valuation going into the future. So the people that understand that are now worth billions, which is just a worker. That's not someone who owns one of the companies. That is an employee we're talking. And I saw that and I was like, man, that is huge, because that means that this new technology really is, and maybe Zuckerberg may be wrong. I don't think so, but this new technology is going to just break all records that we even thought were out there. And yeah, I think the 20s is probably what I would say. That's as good of a shot as any, unless we haven't even come back to the 20s yet, and we're still on the first sort of projection, and we haven't even come around to the full circle yet. That's kind of where I think we might be, but the 20s is probably the closest. And man, it's going to be interesting if people are making $1 billion on a W-2 salary.
So I do also want to put into context some of the things that we've said. When it comes to the people identified as movers and shifters of like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, George Soros, I do want to just compare net worths of those people for a second, just to contemplate the and talk about like the levels that they're at. Just did a quick Google search on a separate monitor. According to Google right now, Elon Musk is about 475 billion net worth. George Soros is about 7.5 billion net worth. Um, Warren Buffett about 150 billion. We can go look at the billionaire list, but I do just want to make sure that we're all in the same realm of like, okay, where are these? What are we talking about major leagues or are we talking about minor leagues here? So I just want to contextualize that. And as of currently filming, wealthiest people on planet Earth are Elon Musk, Larry Ellison at about 370 billion, Mark Zuckerberg at 270, Jeff Bezos at 250, and then Larry and Sergey each had about 200 billion. So we can definitely see where that massive accumulation of wealth is. It's
I mean,
technology.
407. I mean, that's a big difference. I mean, you have a lot more muscle if you're going to be able to just, basically almost 10x him and just like do whatever you want with that other 393 million. I mean, that's quite some juice there.
And they're
Totally.
wealthier than countries. I mean,
Yeah.
is the insane part. Like, and that feels very 20s, where like, 20s or like even like earlier when like the East Indian Trading Company was probably worth more than like the majority of countries. Now we're seeing, these major companies rival, anything outside of like the top 25. Like it's an insane amount of wealth concentration.
100%. I also think some interesting parallels, and I think you're probably pretty spot on, is we saw the build out of the railroads in the mid to late 1800s. We saw the adoption of steel and the mass amount of construction. I mean, really, a lot of what modern day New York looks like has its roots in that boom period of steel and Carnegie Steel, Vanderbilt railroads. You had Rockefeller oil, hence the background here, which Standard Oil propaganda image, and so I think that's very parallel to, or we can draw parallels to the build out of data centers and AI stacks and chips and these modern day um, centers of power. Interestingly enough, though, the things back then that were critical of transportation, infrastructure, and energy still very big today, still critically important today. But what's interesting is that it's not necessarily the United States who has gone on a massive building spree. It's China. So those are definitely some interesting parallels though of the build out of these newer pieces of technology and these newer pieces of infrastructure. So how do you guys think that ends? To close that loop, are you guys thinking, okay, well, if we're replaying the 20s, have some fun, live it up, and then also maybe store a few shekels away for the winter because winter is coming.
Yeah, we're so due for an actual recession. Like, because we've essentially just had these like rolling like recessions where like you get a couple indicators that like indicate that we might be in a recession, but they never really hit. And we've had like the labor hoarding phenomenon. So like you haven't really gotten the layoffs you've seen in like other events. So, I mean, there's despite all of the bear porn that proliferates Twitter, like and shout
That's
out to
good.
Darius, like because he's the one who really opened my eyes to this. It's because being negative makes you sound smarter and it sells more subscriptions. So we actually have like
True.
that sort of force that actually gives a bearish bias to analytical work. Oh, pay for my subscription for my Substack because I'm telling you about this giant recession that's coming like right on the horizon. Where between if you've been listening to your favorite bear porn commentator, or you just, if you're in the United States and you just hate Trump and you just assume that he's going to do everything wrong and that the market's going to show that, you've been getting absolutely bent in the market and missing out on all-time highs in the SPY, all-time high in Bitcoin, all-time high in gold, all-time high in these AI stocks or the Magnificent Seven, all-time high we just hit in uranium and semiconductors. Like you've been sidelined, and I don't want to like say that like we're due for a recession in a macro standpoint. I actually think the chances of this market melting up is there's more upside risk than there is downside risk. We've got 7 trillion sitting in money market accounts. We've never been more, and when I say we, I mean as a country where unfortunately, we've got like a very lopsided K wealth distribution where all of the consumer expenditure essentially comes from the wealthiest people. Those are the people who are making all the money from the assets. But we've got 7 trillion sitting in money market accounts, which just took a 25 bip hit when this rate cut. We've got another two rate cuts priced in for this year. Like, what's going to end up happening when those money markets are paying 3.5, 3%? Where's that money going to roll into? So I think like the upside risk is actually substantially more as all these, bear porn. If you're a retail investor, you can sniff the bear porn cocaine all day long and just lose money. It's your right as a retail investor. It's your money. If you're a professional investor and you're missing out on these gains, you're going to get walked out of your seat. And eventually people are going to have to capitulate to the upside if this keeps cranking. Plus, like from a policy standpoint, the tariffs were a big boogeyman. I actually think it's very funny that during COVID, we essentially had what was the most clear inflationary impulse of just printing that much money and airdropping it to all of the population. And now the definition of transitory inflation is a tariff impulse. It is a one-time price hike. This was zero, like, this was at equilibrium. Now we're charging 20% more. That price will go up 20%, but it's not going to go up another 20%. Like, it is by definition transitory, but because the Fed essentially looked like a fucking idiot because they were saying what was clearly not transitory was, now we saw this sort of like doubling down of like, oh, this inflation from the tariffs, blah, 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 blah. So we've got like sort of that boogeyman, which is sort of starting to fade. And then we've got really the bullish deregulation coming down the pipe. We've got all the money that's going to be essentially getting injected into the system from, the big beautiful bill or the big ugly bill, depending on like how much you care about our fiscal and monetary state. So I think it's going to be very interesting, and we might really be in the early stages of this giant sort of like rip. But at the end of this, I mean, you look at these Bitcoin and ETH treasury companies. I don't know how this play goes, but I know the ending. And that's going to be a giant crash. Like when you've got these absolute garbage companies lever longing an incredible risk asset, which I'm longtime bull on Bitcoin. I hold Bitcoin, but eventually, just like with NFTs or AI or the canal boom or the railroad boom, we get so greedy when we dream that we try and pull all these gains like from AI out of the future for like 15 years, and you eventually have to like pay the piper if we're not getting those sort of like productivity booms that were being promised.
That that one thing I want to just comment on, and then Jared, I want to hear what you have to say. The one thing I want to just double, triple, quadruple click on is how quickly the wonders of leverage to the upside in the form of these treasury companies, which essentially is just adding leverage to the system. I would encourage everybody to really go do a deep dive to understand why, but it's essentially just adding leverage to the system. As that works in your favor on the upside, that absolutely is going to work in the exact opposite way on the downside, and it will probably be a lot more painful. Actually, we know from human nature, it is way more painful to lose $100 than it is pleasurable to gain $100. So just please be prepared at everyone for that unwinding or that leverage working against you in the other direction, because it's gonna happen at some point. If history tells us anything, what goes up will likely come down. So just a quick, you know, PSA to check that and make sure that if you are betting in the casino with everybody else, to just please be aware of that, because that'll totally fuck you and you won't see it coming if you're not prepared for it. Okay. Well, I'm done.
I'm going to take sort of a different take on this. And I mean, I love your take. This is a different aspect of it. So, thinking of the pendulum swinging between sort of, free markets and government intervention, I think at some point there's going to be political pressure to sort of break up under the Sherman Antitrust Act, the monopolies, right? And at some point that is going to be politically a huge deal. I mean, I'm sure it is now, but enough that someone will get elected and their job is going to be to break up these large corporations, just like that happened, way back with Standard Oil, back with, Bell, all the bells, the baby bells that turned into all the different telecom companies. And I think that is coming to a lot of this, social media, and I wonder if this is ever going to come to, crypto. I thought about that not long ago, and I was like, let's say this one crypto company, let's whatever, has the corner on DeFi, let's say whatever it is, whichever company is the one, and everyone's like, this is the only one we're going to use because it's the best. And if there is enough on different chains, then maybe the Sherman Antitrust Act wouldn't qualify. I guess that's going to depend on how good your lawyer is. But the point is that at some point they're going to come for a lot of these, and they're going to start breaking them up when it becomes politically important to get elected and to kind of cut down these people who have the billions of dollars. And I think there's a strong current of that in our political narrative. And I think at some point, I wouldn't say in the far future, I would think in the next 2, 3 president cycles, that's going to be a big issue. And I foresee that coming like it did before, where they're like, all right, we got to break this up. There's too much money. And then you have to separate companies. And I wonder if that's a route that we might take to sort of respawn innovation and sort of bring it back. Because, like you said, if you have this huge company, just like a large government, it's going to get stale at some point. Some of the people can't rise to the top because they're just bloated, just like a government. And it may be a good idea to shake some of these up and see what kind of innovation and things can happen. And that may be a good sort of indication of where we may be going in the next 20 years with, some of that, back in the roaring 20s. Like that could bring that back.
So, a comment and a question. One, I think if we are truly a free market society, that a monopoly, like, sh- should we actually be afraid of that in a free market society? Now, oftentimes a monopoly will go and create regulatory capture, which will make it not a free market environment so that there can't be competition. But if somebody's just serving customers better and they continue to do that year after year and they get better at that, does not that actually serve the customer? Like, isn't that the whole point of capitalism, is to just let the best win? Because nothing is existed forever. So how do we feel about that? It's
It has
two,
to unreasonably affect trade in a negative way. That's sort of the test.
two is if there are going to be monopolies, which I think history's proof there will be, there likely will always be. Would you guys prefer that they be in the United States or not?
Oh, for sure. It's better to have it's better to have the monopoly than have like China have the monopoly. Like especially if you think on like what I think is going to be a future interesting thing is like what about the first few companies that get to space and do like asteroid mining? Like obviously that has huge military implications, national security implications, like resource implications. So like it's
Economic.
economic. And I think a lot of it's going to come down to because we have a democratic system and like going back to like Plato's Republic, like you have to fear the mob. Because at some point it's got to be what gets people elected. So like public perception is going to come into this, and you're starting to see it on the university system, which have had little monopolies over sort of research and education, and in some ways been big players in investment. And you're starting to see, Trump going after Harvard as sort of like an early example of like these universities had like essentially carte blanche rights to do whatever they wanted, including, having multi tens of billions in private equity that they don't have to pay taxes on. So like you're starting to see that start to like roll over. And so I think a lot of it's going to come down to like how unpopular it becomes, and I think the barometer is the wealth distribution. the more concentrated it gets and the more people that are frustrated by that and are willing to vote based on that, I think the more we're going to see that get driven.
Now a word from our sponsors.
What's up, crypto gamers? Shout out to our sponsor, Myria. Myria is revolutionizing Ethereum-based gaming with its powerful L2 scaling solution. Think zero gas fees, instant transactions, free NFT minting, and more. Myria offers a suite of tools that are tailor-built for game development, including game-specific SDKs, a spec'd-out marketplace, Web3 spiked leaderboards, new AI super tools, and more. All this fueled by a fleet of player-run nodes that are a breeze to operate and pump out daily rewards for supporting the ecosystem. Plus, check out Meta Rush, the Battle Royale obstacle runner by Myria Studios, dropping very, very soon.
And now back to your regularly scheduled program.
Yeah, and I agree with you that it's better to have it here. Now that's a good point. It's, you have to sort of, when you're looking at a monopoly, define what the market is. Is it just the US? Is it the sort of global? Can you differentiate between types of social media? Is it all social media? So it's a very complicated area of law. And I think at some point, if you get the right judges in, and then, like you said, like that sentiment rises to the point of where we have to do something, and then boom, somebody gets elected that's like, I'm running on monopolies and I'm going to destroy them, then I think that that would do that. Now, free market society, I think you absolutely would want to have a monopoly be allowed under free market, but you also want to have the ability to break one up. And I think it is, I'm a huge proponent of free market, but if you have one that has such a stronghold that there's no possible way a competitor would come in, maybe they get killed, maybe there's just no way to start, maybe they've monopolized the permit and application process, maybe the cost of getting into it is so high
that's not
that
a
no
free
one's going to
market.
do it. It's not a free market, but that, I think, is something where you need to have a government have the ability to come in and break up a private company if they have that control over it. And I think that's an important aspect. Although part of me is like shaking. It's like, man, just let it happen, because eventually you would have everyone be like, we're done with this. Then there's the uprising, and then we have another company that comes up and competes with it. But I do think it's important to a certain extent. It certainly can be overused. And I think it's a very dangerous tool. A lot of times it's like, a hammer, right? To kill, like, oh, this one little small speck where we could just, like, let's scratch it out with a razor, but you just get the big hammer and smash everything. And that's something I'm also fearful about. That's probably worse, in my opinion, to take the hammer and use it against a company. But we've seen that happen before. And certainly, and not just that, in lots of aspects of our political society, and it could be dangerous. So I think it needs to be taken with caution. But I think it's an important tool to have. If a company has such a stronghold that no one can break in.
Well, if they're just that good, then tough shit. Like, that's
Yeah.
how the fucking world works. It is what it is. They kicked your ass. Don't cry about it. Get better. But if they're doing things to where it becomes not a free market, like you can't get a permit, like, nah, fuck that. That makes it not a free market, which defeats the whole point. Which obviously, as these monopolies get bigger, they think of clever ways to do that more and more and more. And it's just the natural evolution of things. But I think it should be our responsibility as the people who elect other people to govern us. We're voting for, for other people to govern us, and we have to live with that. So I think we should all take accountability for that. I think we should be saying, hey, we want to give our strongest asset, which in my opinion is our entrepreneurial class, the folks of people who are building and innovating and creating, the creators, right? In whatever way, shape, or form that takes. I think that's our strongest asset as a country, and our ability to grow and thrive and solve problems privately, and have 400 million people all independently chasing their own personal ambitions and aims, and collectively, we as the United States, in my opinion, we should be creating a very fertile environment for our people to thrive within. We shouldn't be saying like, no, you can't have a monopoly. What we should be, in my opinion, we should be saying is we're going to create a system of laws and a governance framework to where entrepreneurship can thrive and the individual can move up in life. And there's a reason to get up and work hard in the morning, and you will have safety in your homes, and you will have reasonable amounts of public infrastructure that do not hamper your ability to be effective. And to me, that seems kind of obvious, right? Like, and I think it definitely just feels like we've strayed a little bit away from that. A perhaps controversial question is, because why not? Let's stir up a little controversy if we can. What did you guys think about the US taking a stake in Intel? Does this usher in a new era of public private co-ownership? What are the implications? What do we think?
It's interesting because not the first time things like this has happened with Intel. So during the period of like chip manufacturing, really good book by, I believe, one of the founders of Intel, or one of the, yeah, here it is. Only the Paranoid Survive, Andrew Grove. And a lot of that covered, and same with Chip Wars, which is another great one, sort of covered like the early days of like the chip and the manufacturing, and as like the ability to like print chips was getting more and more competitive and more specialized, like the government would either open up funding to these companies. Obviously in the financial side, we saw, you know, the big bailouts of these big banks where like the government would essentially backstop people like Warren Buffett or Jamie Dimon from essentially bailing out, and the US government would take all the toxic assets. So the interesting thing is like we have injected public money into private companies before. The real difference here is that we're opening up the taxpayer to the upside. Because essentially we previously had only backstopped the downside. So, you know, obviously the financial market recovered and made tons of gains, and the government got none of that. We just ended up holding all of the toxic assets, which by definition were giant losers with no upside. A lot of these being toxic bonds. And, you know, the private entities that we backstopped ended up getting all the good shit. So, this, I think, in some ways, I think there are going to be bad side effects of it. But I guess in principle, I think it makes sense to open up the taxpayer to the upside if the public sector is taking the risk.
Yeah, I agree. I like that aspect of it because normally you'll have bailouts, you'll have government incentives or loans or, tax credits. All those things really help the company, and doesn't really help the government. It's all money out. The only thing I could think of other than this instance would be like a contract, right? Where you have a defense contract or something else where, probably both sides should get some equal amount of value out of that. But this is certainly a good way to get upside. Now, I hate the fact that the government is intervening. I think overall, when you look at it, it's sort of a cloudy, murky, sort of trail that could turn out much, much worse. But I know it's going to happen. We're going to do it in many ways. So why not capitalize on the upside part of it, where we normally don't? We normally never get that. And the taxpayer just foots the bill. The company, makes out like a bandit. And, here we're stuck with the bag regardless. So, if we're going to do it, which we are, no matter what, I think at least capitalizing on the upside is at least a sort of incentive to maybe structure it a better way going forward if we're going to do it at all, which we always will.
My follow-up question to that is, yeah, but what does that mean? Like, what does that mean in practice? Does that mean we now have a government incentive to go in and loan money to companies and become the United States of private equity? Does that mean that we then can choose to sell these things? And then what happens to the proceeds? What happens with the dividends? Where does that go? Who decides what happens with that? Do we pay taxes on that? Are we pay taxes to ourselves? What are the implications of some companies in the United States having USA on balance sheet and some companies not? Is that going to set up a system of perverse incentives to where if you have to let one die, which one are you going to choose? You know what I mean? Like, and also, could this set up a scenario where instead of the government being at our doorstep knocking on April 15th for their, you know, toll bridge toll, they're a troll at their toll bridge saying, you know, you may not pass go and collect $200. You must pay us. Could that be an alternative over time? Like, these are the things I'm trying to think through is like, what are the long term implications of this? Because a lot of things make sense in the moment that you look back and you're like, that was a fucking terrible idea. For example, as we outsourced more and more low profit margin manufacturing to China, we also outsourced more and more of the control of our own destiny in the form of manufacturing and the ability to be self sufficient. And each incremental decision of, oh, we'll outsource a little bit more. That was low profits. That was a low profit margin business line. That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. But then 30 years later, you're like, oh, fuck, that's not okay. So these are my questions are what are the long-term implications? And have we really thought those through?
No, we never think anything through. That's the only part that I'm confident in. We think to midterms. So we're thinking at 2 years at a time tops with a little bit of a look to the presidential election on a 4-year basis. That is I mean, it's no surprise in some ways that China is eating our lunch in certain aspects because they have a 100-year plan and we've got a at best 18-month plan to 2-year plan. So I don't think we thought through really the ramifications. I do think one of the things that you were getting alluding to was this will absolutely continue the rate that we're picking winners and losers. Like it is, I think I got it from you, Ben, like show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. That's going to happen. If you have to choose between two companies, and if one company gets that government contract, the state is going to make a mint on their, early equity. Like that is going to influence decisions. It's
And who
certainly
benefits from that?
the companies, the politicians. I mean, we already have such an issue with like the military industrial complex where, politicians can get a cushy board job at Raytheon if they play ball during their administration. So I think we're going to see that in the tech business more, which is becoming more and more important to national security. So I mean, this is going to definitely drive some perverse outcomes. But I guess like if we're going to do it either way, do we at least do it so that like the government can make money off of it? It's a quagmire, and it's definitely, in some ways, in the ways that we're taking equity, unprecedented. Although if you look at a longer time horizon, for really important industries, this was common. I mean, I think the country of Spain foot the bill, or Portugal foot the bill for Christopher Columbus to go to the United States because there was going to be so many resources there. So in some ways, like if you got, and especially in the early Americas, like Spain had enormous influence because they footed the bill to send these giant ships over there and start off that whole process. And I think we're going to probably see something similar in space and the digital world.
But let's then play that out a couple of 100 years later. What happened after that? Because Spain and Portugal both got tremendous wealth and they had tremendous land holdings. Famously, Portugal basically conquered Brazil. By the way, and I know this because I just went to Portugal and I did a lot of learning about it. Portugal, and specifically Prince Henry the Navigator of Portugal, was the one who first went to West Africa and learned about the existing slave markets that they had. And he opened up the North Atlantic slave trade. Portugal just by themselves, they moved 5 million people to Brazil forcibly. So what then happens after that? Well, they're very wealthy because they own Brazil, but then they become over reliant on Brazil as their main source of an economic driver. They get lazy at home. And then Brazil says, fuck you. You're just taking our money and you're not contributing anything to us. And you guys have no power, actually. And Brazil's like, we're going to be our own country. And if you look at it, like, that was Portugal's decline. Portugal has been a declining empire since late 1400s, early 1500s. They are very weak today, to put it bluntly. Like, they are kind of a non-player in the
They
global
put the
scheme.
P in pigs.
Yeah. So Spain also did the same exact thing. They conquered a huge amount of territory in North, Central, and South America. What did they do? They started extracting silver and other wealth from these countries, these territories. And then what happened after that? Eventually, the territories were like, you guys aren't contributing anything. Then Spain got fucked by who's the French guy? Napoleon, and all of their colonies said, you guys aren't even in control of your own country. We're out of here. And then Spain crumbled to dust. So is that actually the best way to do it? For short-term wealth gain, sure. But for long-term dominance as an empire, I don't know. Evidence is to the contrary.
Yeah, I think you have to sort of, if you're going to do it, you have to be like China. To me, China is such a nimble country because let's say that they make a decision at the highest level that is going to be implemented pretty much immediately. And they are going to make those decisions with swift force. Think about the US. If we make a decision, well, it's going to take a year to make that decision. Then we got to vote on it. And then there's going to be some argument and debate. So just even like getting out of those investments or getting into them is such an unwieldy process. To me, you've got to be way more nimble if you're going to act like this type of, if you're going to do this type of thing. And China has that ability, and we certainly don't.
But what if you're wrong? One child policy.
Yeah,
Again, they made
exactly.
the decision. They went
That's the
hard in the
negative.
fucking paint and they
Yeah.
were wrong. And they
For sure.
completely destroyed future populations.
You're 100% right. That's why it's probably wise for us to not do any of those things as a government. That's at the end of the day, that would be my vote. Why we're even doing this, I think, is a bad idea. I think you're right. It's a slippery slope.
Well, I don't know. I'm just like, and it's kind of like bear porn. I think it's easy to sit here and say, that's dumb about it. That's dumb. Maybe we
Yeah.
shouldn't do that. Here's the issue with that. But it's like, all right, Ben, also propose a fucking solution instead of just sitting here trying to poke holes at everything, even though it's fun to poke holes and stuff. But one of the things I will say is some of the long-term implications too of going in and being a backstop or using government subsidies to try to incentivize things is it may sound like a good idea of like we want to promote this thing and therefore we will throw money at that thing or somehow give it an advantage, structural advantage it did not have previously, an artificial structural advantage it did not have previously. Let's examine what does that actually do? Oftentimes, when we look at subsidies, what happens is that the companies who you're trying to help, so the companies receiving the subsidies, let's take a random thing. Let's say ball caps. Let's say you're doing hats. You're giving hat subsidies. Well, if you have a hat subsidy company who scales up and becomes a dominant player off of the subsidies, what that can create if they're undisciplined, which everybody becomes undisciplined when they get free money, and that happens over an extended period of time. It's an if, not a when. It's a when, not an if, in my opinion. And I think if you look at history, that's proven. They build their business models around the subsidy. And so their profit margin depends on the subsidy. And so they're a weak company. because when the subsidy gets taken away, all their profit gets taken away and they're no longer a viable business and therefore they're weak. And so they're not efficient, they're not resourceful, they're just suckling the teat. And so play that out in the long run. Do we want to have a bunch of weak companies and weak industry that's reliant on the government, aka us, to just give our money instead of forcing the meritocracy and forcing companies to be able to survive and create better business models to where they can survive and thrive on their own with no help? In my opinion, it's better to just take the harder, slower path and get there organically and perhaps set up some other sort of incentive. For example, the depreciation incentive, that's encouraging a lot of people to build because you can depreciate in 1 year as opposed to over time, is my understanding of that. That seems like that's probably a positive, constructive incentive. Um, if TLDR, I'm talking too much. TLDR, if we use, if we give people money to do things as the incentive and we basically have them become reliant on that, I think there are a lot of issues downstream that come from that in the form of they're going to be weak and they can't survive on their own, which ultimately just hurts us. So I would like to see a free market too and just let the companies win and use regulation as an equalizing function to just force good competition in a free market. I think. I don't know. Call bullshit on
Yeah,
me though.
I have a good example of that. So we helped a company purchase a biodiesel plant, and we got it out of bankruptcy from a German bank. And there was a dollar tax credit on it's a blender's credit, where for every gallon you make, you get a tax credit. And then those tax credits went away. And then they came back and they were retroactive, but you didn't know that. And this was right as the company was going live. So that dollar was built into the pro forma, and that was a huge part of the business plan. So as soon as that dollar went away, that was really all of your profit. So they had to, kind of pivot. And then it was like, oh, well, it's coming back. Then it came back, and then it got expired again. And it was like, at this point, it had never made money. And it was such a waste. But the initial idea was that it was built on this. And, I think in 2005, the tax credit started. And then starting maybe 10 years later is when it started going in and out of being expired. And it was a huge political a huge political sort of little carrot or a stick that they would dangle in the opponent's sort of face every time, depending on which president was in. And the whole question was, do we want biofuels to be part of our economy? Like that, I don't know if that was ever answered. Apparently, it was when George Bush came out with it in 2005. But if that's the case, then you need to, have that built, and have it be very clear, like, all right, we're going to do this and we're going to do it for this amount of time. Then it's going to slowly go away. Maybe it's 80 cents this year and then 75, and then it goes down. But to use it as like, oh, we're going to have it. Oh, guess what? No, we voted against it. It's gone. Oh, but we're going to bring it back and then it's retroactive. Yeah, but it's gone again. I mean, you can't build a business off of that. So that's actually worse to have that type of incentive than it would be to have no incentive at all. Because now you're making and breaking companies like you're talking about, which is sort of tying back into, well, what if now they're an investor in one of these companies and, there's that, ooh, it's a conflict of interest. If we approve this, then the company we're invested in, we make a shit ton of money. And but if we don't make that decision, these other companies fail. And it's like, it's sort of, what do you do? So getting in again is a super slippery slope. And, like you said, what is the alternative? Maybe, I don't know. We should come up with a solution. Maybe don't do it at all and let it be a free market. But, that's too simple. There's probably a middle ground. And, this debate would be probably better with those types of things in it. If I could come up with, hey, A, B, and C, but I saw that firsthand and it destroyed an entire company, is the basic story.
To maybe put one final question when it comes to that topic, would it have been smart for us to subsidize horses when the car came out?
No, but assuming that like the Model T and Ford was at the time, like maybe a German company, it might have made sense to subsidize cars. which I think might be like
Hmm.
a bit of like a closer parallel. And I think like one of the big forces that drives this, and this isn't like saying it's better or worse, is we tend to emulate who we're competing with in order to compete. So
Hmm.
if you look at like World War II, in order to fight fascism, we did some of the most fascist things that we'd ever done as like a country. Whether it comes from the fact that in order to destroy Hitler, and a lot of the narrative around it was like, obviously, Hitler was doing terrible things to people. We ended up doing unmitigated bombing campaigns on civilians. In order to defeat Japan, we dropped nukes. In order to defeat the Soviet Union, we put in some of the tightest controls around freedom of speech in the whole McCarthyism era where we were like fighting communism. So I think like part of it is the fact that like China does do this, and where they choose wrong, they go really wrong. But where they choose right, such as subsidizing the production of energy, they're kicking the dog shit out of us because I think the what we're adding to the grid this year, China adds to their grid every week. It might be every few days. So like in some ways it's almost
Hmm.
like a nature of like, okay, if we're competing with this other rival who's doing it, do we have to do it to stay competitive? Because yes, maybe the free market will get there, but by the time it gets there, have we already lost?
Hmm. That is such an interesting thing. So, but is the question, do we have to do that to compete with them? And do they basically remind us of things that we've forgotten? Or is there something else? Like what what does that actually mean? Are we as a country this like the sort of Gryffindor where we only take in things that make us stronger? Or is competition with competing global powers, is that a sharpening function where we're two swords at play and each time we parry we get a little sharper? I don't know. I actually don't know what the implications of that are.
I think the stakes are just so high now because of like how long it can take to catch up and how much of an advantage technology can give you in the short term. Like I think space would be like a good example. Like, obviously, we got to space the first time through heavy government subsidies. We then, like, were the only ones really working on it. So we then let the free market cook and we saw some like crazy innovations. But, like, from an AI standpoint, from a weapon standpoint, like, how did we get the nuke? The nuke is what cemented us as the global power and allowed us to get this huge advantage over the entire rest of the planet. And that was entirely government subsidied and then like using the innovation from like the private sector. So in some of these areas where like we cannot afford to be second, in some ways it becomes like unavoidable.
I'm just I'm just so curious about this. I found a chart that I think is important for us to look at. I would like to be able to share my screen really quickly.
Your privileges are granted.
Thank you. There are few charts that I think more wonderfully demonstrate what we're talking about. I'm going to attempt to share my hopefully it worked.
Yep.
Okay. So look at this for a second. Just about everything that the government has touched or has been involved in has dramatically gone up in price. Whereas everything the free market has been able to basically have capitalism drive the price down, the price has come down. Now, clearly, this chart has been cherry picked for the purposes of illustrating this point, but it's a pretty powerful point. Like, I don't know if you guys have tried to go get a big TV lately. It's like a couple $100 for a pretty huge smart TV. Like, that kicks ass. That's great for the consumer. That
For sure.
rocks. We have ridiculous software that is incredibly powerful. That's like 40, $50 a month, whatever. You could use bleeding edge artificial intelligence for free and or $20 a month. That's incredible for the consumer. To me, that's incredible for the everyday average person who should be and is now being empowered by these things. But college tuition, which we know is super heavily government subsidized, like the government is backstopping all of student loans and then forcing people to pay that back even if they go bankrupt with no promise of any sort of upside from that. The only promise you have is that you for sure are going to be strapped with debt. That you know for sure. Nothing else is promised, and it is completely backstopped by the government, in my opinion. It's kind of fucked. I don't know. What do you go? What do you got? Is this a helpful chart? Do you guys think this is useful?
For sure. I think.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jared. After you.
Oh, no, go ahead, Nick. I was just going to talk about Milton Friedman.
I'll kick it over to Milton in a sec. I would say, like, and this is honestly cutting my point off my previous point at the knees, like from military standpoint, where I think this like has been the most like perverse, like you do end up in issues where like you could now, like if you look at the Iron Dome, which was obviously enormously subsidized by the United States as well as Israeli government almost entirely, with some private sector involvement. You now have an issue where Hamas and Hezbollah were shooting rockets that cost 100th of what was being used to shoot them down. And now you're seeing in Ukraine, which was forced to get very scrappy, now using very cheap retail drones to blow up, multi-million dollar Russian tanks. So that can definitely, I think, maybe show that on the highest level, that if you overdo it, I guess like maybe it should really just be reserved for the things that like we can't be second. But like not everything's a nuke. Hospital services are not nukes. College tuition is not a nuke. Medical care, not a nuke. Child care, not a nuke. Housing, not a nuke. Like I think there's scope creep where the government gets involved in like too much and that ends up being inflated in the costs. But there might be like some things where there are exceptions where, okay, we can't afford to be second here or we could lose our place.
It's a good
Yeah.
point.
And
But
I love, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask the question. But if we think that okay, the government has to be involved in mission critical things, the chart kind of shows when the government does that, the result is not positive. Like I'm pretty sure we saw a few well-intentioned government money drops into things like rural internet. Pretty sure nobody has gotten rural internet from that, and we just lit tens of billions of dollars on fire.
For sure.
I'm pretty sure we've tried to do that with public transportation, and so far there's been almost zero progress for many years, and we just lit billions and billions of dollars on fire. Like the government has gotten involved in things like hospital services and medical care services, and shocker, the price has gone up. Like to me, it's like it's pretty clear the government should not be in the way there. Let private industry do it. The government should be there to say these are the rules of engagement, and we should spend our time thinking about what are the right rules of engagement. What should the environment look like, and then maybe with a very gentle hand tip the scales in the favor of the incentives that we need. So, for example, perhaps we want to say it's a national imperative that the birth rate reaches 2.1 on average. Okay, how could you tip the scales gently without throwing a bunch of money at something? I think questions like that or approaches like that, where it's actually the it's actually helpful, because otherwise the government's just going to come in, throw a bunch of money at something, things take longer, people are going to choose short-term greed over long-term logical sense and what's best for the community and the civilization as a whole. For example, with the military, we're in a really fucked up system of cost plus, which basically states the government will pay the defense primes 15% on top of whatever the cost is as their profit. Okay. Think about that for 2 seconds. What does that actually lead to? It leads to driving up your costs as much as humanly possible, because you can't improve your margins. So you have to improve on a flat rate by just inflating cost. That's dumb. But somebody like Anduril comes in as a private competitor, and they have way better margins, and they're starting to kick the defense primes asses, and they aren't relying on this cost plus model. Maybe that's the way. I'm just really fearful of the government coming in and saying we for sure need to do it this way, or trying to like force things, because they're probably wrong and it's been kind of fucked up. For example, rent control sounded good in theory, but what happened is that now people are not incentivized to improve the existing properties, and they're not incentivized to build more. And so housing just sucks for everybody, and nobody is happy with the system. Sounds good, not good in theory. But like, how do you work that back? Or how do you figure out this is where the government should get involved, this is where the government shouldn't get involved, and then this is how heavy the hand should be.
Yeah, and I think Milton Friedman's one of my favorite on this, Chicago School of Economics guy. I mean, basically, their limited role is like, protecting property, somewhat maybe maintaining some monetary stability to a certain extent. But for the main part of, like you're talking about, the individual dairy, they're always highly into that. They're, all the different subsidies. Rent control is a perfect example of that. That is outside of their purview. Scope creep is a perfect way to put it. The most temporary thing in the world, in the government's eyes, is usually a permanent project, right? I mean, you just think about all the different. Once you create a three-letter agency, how long does it take before they are wiped out? Never. And then their budget is 110% every year forever. And, that's why the so bloated. That's why it's such an important sort of baseline to go to the very beginning and say, look, you need to step out of this. This is not your purview. And that's slowly creeped in over the course of our history. There's certain presidents like take over, and it's usually like Civil War is a perfect example. Started pulling more of the, individual states' liberty options and bringing it into the U.S. government. It was for a specific purpose, but they didn't just stop there. They went all in, and then slowly each president who's had that power to pull in the government of the states and bring it into the federal government, that, hey, Department of Education, the states aren't doing a good job, let's bring that in house. And then again, it's bloated, they're lazy, they're not going to be innovative. It's just a baseline. So the incentive isn't to grow, it's just to, recede and increase your power and take the power away from the states. I mean, that's really what the bottom line of the goal is, if you look at it. And you're talking about, let's bring up the rate of birth. It's like, all right, well then get out of education. Let's have a price of education come down that's not in the stratosphere. Then people would have more kids. Like that, it's that simple, right? Let's say college was cheap again. Great. I'd have way more kids. Like college is 80 grand a year. It's a lot of money. That's more than 50 grand, which people make. So it's like, how are you going to have 8 kids like you used to? You'd be broke. There's nothing you can do. So, the incentive of them not getting involved is someone coming in and saying, all right, let's look at all of this piece by piece. That chart is a great chart. Sure, it's missing some things, but it proves the point. It's like, oh, we're going to make sure that, milk is cheap for everybody. And then, back in 1986, they're paying actual farmers to kill their cows and not sell the meat because they're producing too much milk. It's like, guys, that if you just stepped out of it, it would all equalize. Some years there may be more, They would kill them. They would have cheaper beef. We would export it. I mean, there's all these different options. But if the government is involved, you don't have those options. There's only either it's this price or you can't sell it. And that's where, it comes in and harms us.
Now, I wonder, does giving the government upside actually act as a counterbalance to what we've been describing? So, if the government had upside in milk production, would they have done what they did, or would they have even gotten involved at all? Because now they actually have a cost of capital, which is what could they have gotten by investing in something that's more profitable? So does this actually push better investment? Because before the only upside was votes and influence. And did you have like in Nebraska, the corn lobby is famous, and that's how we ended up with high fructose corn syrup and all of this stuff and all of these cornfields and degrading all of these things. But like corn's not making a profit for the government. So it'll be interesting to see how yeah, I mean, like it could have perverse consequences where, maybe they'll make bad investments as far as like the direction of the company because or the country because they're profitable. But does it actually cause them to be a little bit more prudent in where they're now investing those dollars rather than just pushing those dollars?
Well, I hope so. What I am not encouraged by is the fact that for basically the entirety of the institution of taxation, the government's been able to just have a money cheat code to say, hey, this is ours now. And so they could have done things like influence the tax code to maximize their revenues when they have omnipotence of, they have maximum power to be able to do so. And I don't really think that they took a long term view on that. I don't think they said to themselves, what is going to give us the most revenue as an institution over the extreme long term? So I don't really have faith that these folks are going to do that. Also, I think if we just look at how we've tried to articulate some of the issues that are going on, I think a lot of people are just really quick to say like, oh, just tax the rich and give the government more money. And I mean, let's just look at what taxation really is, right? Taxation is essentially, in my opinion, taking money from people who have figured out how to earn it. So people who are industrially productive, economically productive, and putting it into the hands of people, aka the government, who has proven to be possibly some of the worst investors in the history of forever. So you're moving money from the hands of competence to incompetence at scale with no checks and balances. There's really zero recourse for that. So to think that we're now trying to give more ownership of the private market, putting more ownership of the private market in the hands of the biggest public actor on planet Earth who has proven time and time again to be incompetent with spending, I'm not sure that actually helps. That kind of seems to me like in The Hobbit when Thorin is looking for the Arkenstone and um, Balin tells Bilbo giving him the greatest jewel that would crown him king of kings would stay his madness. Perhaps it's better that that remains lost. That's kind of what that's coming to be about, or that's how that's coming across to me.
And to stay in that analogy, I think like we should use the Lord of the Rings model, which is we should not be investing government dollars into things like that. But if there is a one ring, and if we don't get into Mount Doom or it ends up in the hands of Sauron, we should give an Elvish blank check, a Gondorian blank check, a Rondorian blank check, the remaining dwarf blank check, the wizard's blank check, the Ents blank check, because that is the only thing that matters. So I think like unless it's a nuke, I think you could maybe make an argument for like quantum, you could maybe make an argument for space, but if it is not going to have a massive effect on our standing as number one, which underpins our entire economy as the reserve currency, then it's not worth it. So we got to like stop getting sucked into milk and corn and education. Like if it ain't a nuke or a nuke comparable game-changing technology, stay the fuck out of it and leave it to the private sector.
I really like that idea of doing way fewer things and then actually doing those well. That actually seems like that might be the issue. Like, fuck off for 99% of the things we're currently fucking on to, and just focus on, like, fuck off of all those things and just focus on, like, the absolute most critical things. And then let's take our ability to debate and to have a very motivated group of incredibly smart people within our country, which exists. Hooray for us. We're still awesome in a lot of ways. We suck in some ways, but we're awesome in a lot of ways. Let's put all our brain power there, at least on the government side. Like, seems like that's pretty much a no brainer.
Agreed. Now, unless anyone has anything left on this topic, I think to maybe like transition towards the end of the podcast, and we tackle a little bit of crypto. Maybe we go around and say, hey, what's the number one thing in crypto right now that's consuming our attention and that we're excited about?
Hmm.
Do one of you guys have like one that's like top of mind?
Yes, the base token, one that was never going to come out, but now it is. I have always thought the base token was going to be the killer token. And then they were like, nah, it's never going to happen. And now that they're hinting that it's going to happen, I think that's going to be a massive game changer because of the reach that it has and the ability to sort of bring all of the different sort of aspects of Coinbase back into it and that DeFi and all the different things that it's going to do. And I think they're probably going to build out a massive ecosystem around it, is what I'm thinking.
Now, is there information on that yet? Is it going to be like a layer two gas token, like an ETH or an AVAX, or like has there been any sort of like, do you know anything about like what the base token is going to be?
I think it was just like a hint on Twitter from Brian Armstrong that it's looking at it, right? I mean, I think that means that if Base is going to do a token, it's going to be massive because they're going to come after sort of every aspect of crypto, which is what they try to do with their company. So I think it is going to be a super hit. And that's what I am sort of consumed with the last day and thinking about what that's going to do as a game changer to all the different layer ones and potentially layer twos and how that's going to integrate with what's out there now.
Now, have either of you guys gotten on the new like base app with their like sort of like tokenized social media?
No.
I use the base app maybe every day, but I haven't used the social media aspect of the base app.
What do you use it for every day?
Just some transactions. I have some hot wallets that I use. Um, I keep a bunch of hot wallets and a bunch of cold wallets, and some of them I use that. So I'm really hoping for the airdrop there. That'd be super tight. Um, I am excited about a couple of things, but probably the thing I'm the most excited about is seeing a company like Nasdaq, which is a company. It's not just an exchange. Invest into Gemini.
Mm.
And what that says to me is that the TradFi world is absolutely trying to adopt crypto fully as an additional market to trade, or as an additional group of markets to trade. And at the same time, stocks are being tokenized. So we're actually, as crazy as it would have seemed 4 years ago, we're actually kind of seeing global adoption of blockchain technology. and crypto, and the ability of tokenization to permeate throughout our financial system is pretty incredible to see how much progress has been made. Whereas that felt more like a meme 4 years ago, it is now happening in front of our faces now. And I think the implications are that crypto will be as easily tradable as stocks and securities. And I think what eventually that means is that there will be 24/7 markets for everything. And you can do some interesting things of weaving all of this stuff together, which also means that more capital will have more access to crypto, which hooray for us, because likely that means more capital coming into crypto and crypto meshing more tight, integrating more tightly with the existing system. And so you'll likely have a ton of volume being driven, a ton of intersection of assets, ton of financial engineering, a ton of corruption, a ton of fucked up shit going on as well, but a proliferation of that. And then as another byproduct of that, I think we're going to have a significant expansion of the use of the dollar because of stablecoins. And that those couple of intersections of those different things will likely mean will likely mean that we'll just have a ton of activity happening. And so where that activity happens in a more tightly integrated way with more products, more access, faster, better, blah blah blah, there's opportunity. Now, it's opportunity to get fucked, but there's also opportunity to benefit there too. So I'm just excited to see how that works and to actually think, holy shit, we went from an industry of ridiculous, just crazy people rocking PFPs and tweeting and sloshing cash around to, okay, we actually have built some technology that is going to be adopted by some of the most leveraged institutions and people on planet fucking Earth. And that is cool. And I'm excited about that. And I have no idea what that means for us, but it means something. And it's interesting. And I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I'm
By the
super
way, I
stoked for
retract that. I was on the base app. I looked it up before. I've traded a few times on it, but I use the main Coinbase app more often. So that was some ad when I pulled it up that popped up for some reason. But base app, interesting. And go ahead. Sorry, Nick.
No, all good. Yeah, I mean, I'm so excited for that sort of like lowering of the veil between crypto and the traditional market. And I totally agree. I think it's coming. I actually think that we're going to see in the next, I'll be a little aggressive, 10 years, we're going to see the entire stock market on chain. You're already seeing JP Morgan has its own blockchain that they're doing internal testing with and doing transactions. And I think we're going to see two things. I think we're going to see potentially in this administration, the stock market no longer close because it's such an easy way to stimulate the economy. Because if you think about all of the companies that make profits and then those profits are taxed based on the volume of the stock market, if you triple the amount of time it's open, you're not going to triple the volume because people sleep, but you're going to definitely increase the volume. And that's going to give a shot in the butt to the economy and a shot in the butt to the tax revenue. Plus, if you're having like some of it trade 24/7 with crypto now trading at 24/7 and you start to get tokenized stocks, are those only going to trade during hours? That doesn't quite make sense. And that seems to be coming. So I'm super excited about that. Like DeFi get incorporated. And overall, like what I've become the most obsessed with lately is DeFi. So black hole, first off, super biased as both a black hole user, a VE NFT holder, a black holder, an employee of Superverse and the association between black holes. So if you're looking for an unbiased opinion, This has been the Interlinked podcast, and I wish you a wonderful rest of your day. This is probably a good time to tune out, but I was late to the party here on DeFi. Like I had, and like Ben, you've been way more advanced in it than I have been on the loan side and the LP side. But I'm like now getting, really introduced to that world and how to trade positions with concentrated liquidity, how to exit big positions using liquidity, like the flywheel before in this 3-3 architecture. And, you know, doesn't suck that I don't know what's going on, but Black has had quite a resurgence off of the low. It's currently trading at 38 cents. So off of that 25 cent, what was the low here? 23 cents it bottomed. And just since the 17th, we went from 26 cents to sitting at 38 cents. So
Damn.
damn, that's good for your boy's bag. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's just cool to actually get, invested and actually using that technology. And then, it's like sort of a consolation thing. Freaking Becker's Pump.fun coin finally got me into Pump.fun to actually fuck around with that and see the streaming platform and the ability to launch a token. Also, there's many people who listen to this podcast who this is not their first cycle. And let me tell you, I was starting to think, oh, I've been around the block, I've seen the crashes, like I'm immune to this sort of like FOMO. I absolutely top blasted Becker's meme coin, not his official meme coin, but his Pump.fun coin. I bought in a 10 million, nearly doubled down 150% of the original position at 15 million, which is in the wicked up to 18 million, and it's currently trading at 2.5. So that was the quickest way since NFT season. I've lost quite a few units doing that. But it was a bit of a tuition just to kind of get into, okay, this is interesting because we haven't really cracked the formula in the traditional market for streaming because like Twitch loses tons of money on the average streamer on their platform because they have to put up this 4K stream with this nobody who's streaming to one person and like not getting the ad revenue. So I think it's an interesting model, and I think it's something that we're going to see more. And currently, Pump.fun and Base are taking totally different techniques, but I think we're going to see more of a tokenization of social media and of streaming and of influencers. And I think these are two examples of companies trying to invest in that space.
All I'll ask, and then I gotta hop, but interlinked streaming? Question mark?
Interlinked could happen. It
I
could
love it.
happen. We might have to give that a run.
Guys, y'all are the best. I love you dearly. Everybody watching and listening, y'all are the best. I will see you guys next time.
Love you, gents. This has been
Love
Neo
you too, guys.
Tokyo's official podcast, Interlinked, and we'll be back with another episode next week. And as a quick little tease, by the time this comes out, we're going to be having a huge gaming event in NT Plays. It's going to be a showcase of Reaper Actual, which is being produced by the guy who made H1Z1, which kicked off the entire sort of battle royale narrative. So definitely tune in for that. That's going to be in collaboration with Superverse. So definitely check that out. And besides that, hope everyone has a great rest of their week. And goddamn, it was great to be back with the boys. That was a ton of fun.
Absolutely. All right, man. Talk to y'all later.
Peace.